Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Political Avenger. This is your host, PA. It is Saturday, August 24th. This is the part two to the alien interview with Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy. Now, if you didn't see part one, I suggest you see that before you join us tonight. It's a very interesting transcript alleged to be top secret that was written down by a U.S. military officer, nurse. I guess you can call her an officer, but she was a military nurse and was part of the Roswell. They call it an interview, but it's more like an interrogation. And it's unbelievable, most of the stuff that's in the transcripts, but reality is stranger than fiction. So let's go ahead and continue. We're on chapter 8. And the chapter is in regards to a lesson in recent history. This is personal notes, official transcripts, top secret. This interview taught me a history lesson I will never read in any textbook written on Earth. The domain has a much different view of events than we do. The domain force has observed a resurgence in science and culture of the Western world since 1150 AD, when the remaining remnants of the space fleet of the quote-unquote old empire in the solar system were destroyed. The influence of the remote control hypnosis operation diminished slightly after that time, but still remains largely in force. Footnote. Apparently, a small amount of damage was done to the quote-unquote old empire remote mind control operation, which resulted in a small decrease in the power of these mechanisms. As a result, some memory of technologies that the SB spiritual beings already knew before they came to Earth started to be remembered. Thereafter, the oppression of the knowledge that is called the quote-unquote Dark Ages, footnote, in Europe began to diminish after that time. Since then, knowledge of the basic laws of physics and electricity have revolutionized Earth culture virtually overnight. The ability to remember technology by many of the geniuses in the quote-unquote ISB spiritual being population of Earth was partially restored when not so actively suppressed as it was before 1150 AD. Sir Isaac Newton is one of the best examples of this. In only a few decades, he single-handedly reinvented several major and fundamental scientific mathematical disciplines. The men who remembered these sciences already knew that they were sent to Earth. Ordinarily, no one would ever observe or discover as much about science and mathematics in a single lifetime, or even in a few hundred lifetimes. These subjects have taken civilizations billions and billions of years to create. The ISBs, spiritual beings on Earth, have only just begun to remember small fragments of all the technologies that exist throughout the universe. Theoretically, if the amnesia mechanisms being used against Earth could be broken entirely, the ISB's spiritual beings would regain all of their memory. Unfortunately, similar advances have not been seen in the humanities as the ISB's spiritual beings of Earth continue to behave very badly towards each other. This behavior, however, is heavily influenced by the quote unquote hypnotic commands given to each spiritual being between lifetimes. And the very unusual combination of inmates on earth are criminals, perverts, artists, revolutionaries, and geniuses is the cause of the very restive and tumultuous environment. Again, this is the extraterrestrial talking during the interview of Roswell. The purpose of the prison planet is to keep Isby's spiritual beings on Earth forever, promoting ignorance, superstition, Warburton Isbys, which helps to keep the prison population crippled, trapped behind the wall of electronic force screens. The Isby spiritual beings have been dumped on Earth from all over the galaxy, adjoining galaxies, and from planetary systems all over the quote unquote old empire, like Sirius, Aldebaran, the Pleiades, Orion's belt, the Draconis, and countless others. There are Isby spiritual beings on Earth from unnamed races, civilizations, cultural backgrounds, and planetary environments. Each of the various Isby spiritual beings populations have their own languages, their own belief systems, their own moral values, their own religious beliefs, their own training, and unknown and untold histories. These spiritual beings, Isbys, are mixed together with earlier inhabitants of Earth who came from another star system more than 400,000 years ago. They established the civilization of Atlanta, or what we call Atlantis today, and Lemuria. Those civilizations vanished beneath the tidal waves caused by a planetary polar shift many thousands of years before. And this was many thousands of years before the current prison population started to arrive. Apparently, the spiritual beings, the Isbys, from those star systems were the source of the original Oriental races of the Earth, beginning in Australia. On the other hand, the civilizations set up on Earth by the quote unquote old empire prison system were very different from the civilization of the old empire itself, which is an electronic space opera with atomic powered conglomeration of earlier civilizations that were conquered with nuclear weapons and colonized by the Isbys spiritual beings from another galaxy. The bureaucracy that controlled the former empire was from an ancient space opera society or race run by a totalitarian confederation of planetary governments that regulated by a brutal social and economic and political hierarchy with a royal monarch as its figurehead. This type of government emerges with regularity on planets where the citizens abandon personal responsibility for autonomous self-regulation. They frequently lose their freedom to demented Isbys or spiritual beings who suffer from an overwhelming paranoia that every other spiritual being or Isby is their enemy. And by the way, again, if you didn't see part one, they're stating that all beings in the universe and the universes are spiritual beings and immortal because you can never die. The soul or the spirit never dies. So they're talking about other spiritual beings. So there's an old empire of spiritual beings that had technology that supposedly were here millions of years ago and controlled the earth. That's why we supposedly have the ancient gods of Egypt and other gods throughout our history. So they frequently lose their freedom to demented Isby spiritual beings who suffer from an overwhelming paranoia that every other spiritual being Isby is their enemy. who must be controlled or destroyed. Their closest friends and allies, whom they espouse to love and cherish, are literally, quote unquote, loved to death by them. Because such ISBs, spiritual beings, exist, the domain has learned that the freedom must be won and maintained through eternal vigilance and the ability to use defensive force to maintain it. As a result, to use defensive force to maintain it, the domain has already conquered the governing planet of the quote unquote old empire. The civilization of the domain, although considerably younger and smaller in size, is already more powerful, better organized, and united by the egalitarian esprit de corps never known in the history of the quote unquote old empire. The recently despoiled German totalitarian state on Earth was similar to the old empire. They might be talking about the Nazis here. So they're saying that the Nazis were like the old empire, but not nearly as brutal and about 10,000 times less powerful. Wow. Okay. Many of the ISB's spiritual beings on Earth are here because they are violently opposed to totalitarian governments, or because they were so psychotically vicious that they could not be controlled by an old empire government. Consequently, the population of the Earth is disproportionately comprised of a very high percentage of such beings. The conflicting cultural and ethical moral codes of the ISB spiritual beings on Earth is unusual in the extreme. So this is not the Earth itself, supposedly it doesn't resemble the universe. Many of the other planets, per the extraterrestrials, allegedly, per the extraterrestrials, uh, there's more diverse on this planet than any other planet in the universe. Usually there's only one race per planet, but our planet has many races, which makes it different from the rest. So again, the conflicting cultural and ethical moral codes of the ISB's spiritual beings on Earth is unusual in the extreme. The domain conquest of the central quote unquote old empire planets was fought with electronic cannon. The citizens of the planets forming the core of the government for the old empire are a filthy, degraded, slave society of mindless, tax-paying workers who practice cannibalism. So the other beings are cannibalistic. This is very interesting. They continues, violent automotive racetracks and bloody Roman circus type entertainments are their only amusements. Regardless of any reasonable justification we may have or may have had for using atomic weapons to vanquish the planets of the old empire, the domain is careful not to ruin the resources of those planets by using weapons of crude radioactive force. The current US civilization is beginning to mimic some of the trappings of the old civilization, especially in the design of airplanes, automobiles, ships, trains, telephones. And likewise, buildings in the cities of the earth are thought to be quote unquote modern or futuristic if their design resembles the architecture of the quote unquote old empire. The government of the old empire, before being supplanted by the domain, was comprised of beings who possessed a very craven intelligence, very much like the Axis powers during your recent World War. Those beings manifested precisely the same behavior as the galactic government that exiled them to the eternal imprisonment on Earth. They were a gruesome reminder of the ageless maxim that an ISB spiritual being will often manifest the treatment they have received from others. Kindness fosters kindness. Cruelty begets cruelty. One must be able and willing to use force tempered with intelligence to prevent harm to the innocent. However, extraordinary understanding, self-discipline, and courage are required to efficiently prevent brutality without being overwhelmed by the malice that motivated the brutality. Only a demonic, self-serving government would employ a quote-unquote logic and quote-unquote science to conceive that the ultimate solution to any problem is to murder and permanently erase the memory of every artist, every genius, skilled manager, and inventor, and cast them into a planetary prison together with the political opponents with killers. So they're gathering everybody in one prison. So they put the artists or the rebellious ones, the skilled managers, the inventors, and cast them into a planet together with political opponents, killers, thieves, perverts, and disabled beings of an entire galaxy. Once the Isby spiritual being is expelled from the old empire and arrives on Earth, they're given amnesia and hypnotically tricked into thinking that something else had happened to them. The next step is to implant the Isbys, spiritual beings, into a biological body on Earth. The bodies become the human populations of quote unquote false civilizations, which were designed and installed in the minds of the Isbys, spiritual beings, to look completely unlike the old empire. All of the Isby spiritual beings of India, of Egypt, of Babylon, of Greece, of Rome, and medieval Europe were guided to pattern and build the cultural elements of these societies based on standard patterns developed by the Isby's spiritual beings of many earlier similar civilizations, which is the Sun Type 12 Class 7 planets. Uh, they have existed for trillions of years throughout the universe. In the earliest times of the Isby's spiritual beings that were sent to prison on Earth lived in India. So these are, I guess they're talking about the gods, the ones that consider themselves the gods. They gradually spread into Mesopotamia. They spread into Egypt, Mesoamerica, Achaia, Greece, Rome, medieval Europe, and the New World. They were hypnotically, quote unquote, commanded to follow the pattern of a given civilization by the old empire prison operators. This is an effective mechanism to disguise the actual time and location from the Isby spiritual beings imprisoned on Earth. The languages, the costumes, the culture of each false civilization are intended to reinforce the amnesia because they do not remind the Isby spiritual beings on Earth of the original old empire planets from which they were deported from. On the very far back track of time, these types of civilizations tended to repeat themselves over and over because the Isby spiritual beings who created them became familiar with certain patterns and styles, and they stayed with them. It is a lot of work to invent an entire civilization, complete with cultural architecture, language, customs, mathematics, moral values, and so forth. It is much easier to replicate a copy based on a familiar and successful pattern. Now, again, this is the extraterrestrial speaking. A Sun type 12 class 7 planet is the designation given to a planet inhabited by carbon oxygen based life forms. The class of the planet is based on the size and radiation intensity of the star, the distance of the planetary orbit from the star, and the size and density, gravity, and chemical composition of the planet. Likewise, flora and fauna are designated in and identified according to the star type and class of planet they inhabit. On the average, the percentage of planets in the physical universe with a breathable atmosphere is relatively small. Most planets do not have an atmosphere upon which life forms quote unquote feed, as on Earth, where the chemical composition of the atmosphere provides nutrition to plants and other organisms, which in turn support other life forms. When the domain force brought the Vedic hymns to the Himalayas region in 8,200 years ago, some human societies already existed. The Aryan people invaded and conquered India, bringing the Vedic hymns to the area. So, this is the Aryan people are supposedly, this is what the Nazis wanted to find out about or wanted to learn about when they went to meet with the Dalai Lama in Tibet. They were talking about the Aryan people, and the Aryan people were the people in the Himalayas, basically. The Vedas or the Vedas were learned by them, memorized, and carried forward verbally for 7,000 years before being committed to written form. During that span of time, one of the officers of the domain force was incarnated on earth as Vishnu. He is described by many in the Rig Veda. He is still considered to be a god by the Hindus. Vishnu fought in the religious wars against the quote unquote old empire forces. He is a very able and aggressive Isbi spiritual being, as well as a highly effective officer who has since been reassigned to other duties in the domain. Okay, so I'm going to interject here because I know people don't talk about this, but the majority of military personnel around the world and secret societies, they practice the occult religion. And they believe in the gods of India and other gods, especially the Nazis that were brought over from Project Paperclip. They believe in the gods of India. If you guys were not aware, you should do the research on that. That's why they used the swastika. The swastika is actually from uh, the Hindus, Hinduism and Buddhism, the Asiatic religions. That is their symbol. There's the swastika, and then I forgot when you reverse it, it's called something else, and it represents the dark force and the light force. The Nazis took that symbol, and it's actually been used in all religions. They took the swastika and made it their own. But that symbol has been around for thousands and thousands of years. He is still, so they're talking about Vishnu. He is still considered to be a god by the Hindus. Vishnu fought in the religious wars against the old empire forces. He is a very able and aggressive spiritual being, Isbi, as well as a highly effective officer who has since been reassigned to other duties in the domain. This entire episode was orchestrated as an attack and revolt against the Egyptian pantheon, installed by the old empire administrators. The conflict was intended to help free humankind from the implanted elements of the false civilization that focused attention on the many gods and superstitious ritual worship that was demanded by the priest who quote unquote managed them. It is all part of the mental manipulation of the old quote unquote empire to hide their criminal actions against the spiritual beings on earth. A priesthood or the prison guards, as they should be called, were used to help reinforce the idea that an individual is only a biological body and is not an immortal spiritual being, which they're saying, which the extraterrestrial is saying it's a lie. You are immortal beings. The individual has no identity. The individuals have no past lives. This is what they're told. The individual has no power. Only the gods have power. And the gods are a contrivance of the priesthood or the priests who intercede between men and the gods they serve. Men are slaves, or mankind are slaves, to the dictates of the priests and the priesthood, who threaten eternal spiritual punishment if men do not obey. What else would one expect on a prison planet where all the prisoners have amnesia and the priesthood themselves are prisoners? The intervention of the domain force on Earth has not been entirely successful due to the secret mind control operation of the quote unquote old empire that still continues to operate. A battle was waged between the old empire forces and the domain through religious conquest. Between 1500 BC and about 1200 BC, the domain forces attempted to teach the concept of an individual, immortal spiritual being to several influential beings on Earth. One such instance resulted in a very tragic misunderstanding, misinterpretation, misapplication of the concept. The idea was perverted and applied to mean that there is only one Isbi, or one spiritual being, instead of the truth that everyone is an Isbi and a spiritual being. Obviously, this was a gross incomprehension and an utter unwillingness to take responsibility for one's own power. The quote unquote old empire priesthood managed to corrupt the concept of the individual immortality into the idea that there is only one all powerful Isbi, or one supreme being, and that no one else is or is allowed to be an Isbi or spiritual being. Obviously, this is the work of the old empire amnesia operation. It is easy to teach this altered notion to beings who do not want to be responsible for their own lives. Slaves are such beings. As long as one chooses to assign responsibility for creation, existence, and personal accountability for one's own thoughts and actions to others, one is a slave. That's an incredibly powerful statement. As a result, the concept of the single monotheistic God, or quote unquote God, resulted as and was promoted by many self proclaimed prophets, such as the Jewish slave leader Moses, who grew up in the household of the Pharaoh Imhotep III, and his son Akhenaten, and his wife Nefertiti, as well as his son Tutankhamun. The attempt to teach certain beings on earth the truth that they are themselves Isbis and spiritual beings was part of the plan to overthrow the fictional, metaphorical, anthropomorphic panoply of gods created by the quote unquote old empire and mystery cult that's called the Brothers of the Serpent. So that's a secret society, the Brothers of the Serpent. The Brothers of the Serpent, known in Egypt as the priesthood of Amun, they were a very ancient secret society within the old empire. The pharaoh Akhenaten was not a very intelligent being and was heavily influenced by his personal ambition for self-glorification. He altered the concept of the individual spiritual being and embodied the concept in the sun god Aten. His pitiful existence was soon ended. He was assassinated by Maya and Patenefer, two of the priesthoods, a priest of Amun, or Amen, like Amen, Amen, which is the Christians still say, who represented the interest of the old empire forces. The idea of the quote unquote one God was perpetrated by the Hebrew leader Moses while he was in Egypt. He left Egypt with his adopted people, the Jewish slaves. While they were crossing the desert, Moses was intercepted by an operative of the quote unquote old empire near Mount Sinai. Moses was tricked into believing that this operative was the one God through the use of hypnotic commands, as well as technical and aesthetic tricks, which are commonly used by the old empire to trap Isbis and spiritual beings. Thereafter, the Jewish slaves who trusted the word of Moses implicitly have worshipped a single God they call Yahweh. The name Yahweh means anonymous, as the Isbi spiritual beings who worked with Moses could not use an actual name or anything that would identify himself or blow the cover of the amnesia prison operation. The last thing the covert amnesia hypnosis prison system wants to do is to reveal themselves openly to the Isbi spiritual beings of Earth. They feel that this would restore the inmates' memories. This is the reason that all traces of the physical encounters between operatives of space civilizations and humans is very carefully hidden, disguised, covered up, and denied or misdirected. The old empire operatives contacted Moses on the desert mountain top and delivered the quote unquote 10 hypnotic commands to him. These commands are very forcefully worded and compel a spiritual being into utter subservience to the will of the operator. These hypnotic commands are still in effect and influence the thought patterns of millions of Isbi spiritual beings for thousands of years later. Incidentally, we later discover that the so-called Yahweh also wrote, programmed, and encoded text of the Torah, which it is read literally or in its decoded form will provide a great deal more of false information to those who read it. Ultimately, the Vedic hymns became the source of nearly all of Eastern religions and were the philosophical source of the ideas of the common Buddha and the Loazi Zoroaster and the other philosophers. The civilizing influences of these philosophies eventually replaced the brutal idolatry of the old empire religions and were the true genesis of kindness and compassion. You asked me earlier why the domain and other space civilizations do not land on Earth or make their presence known. Land on Earth. Do you think we are crazy or want to be crazy? It takes a very brave spiritual being to come down to Earth through the atmosphere and land on Earth, because this is a prison planet with a very uncontrolled, psychotic population. And no spiritual being Isbi is entirely proof against the risk of entrapment, as with the members of the domain force who were captured in the Himalayas 8,200 years ago. No one knows what Isbi spiritual beings on Earth are going to do. We are not scheduled to invest the resources of the domain to take total control of all the space surrounding the area at this time. This will occur in the not too distant future, about 5,000 Earth years, according to the time schedule of the domain. At this time, we do not prevent transports from other planetary systems or galaxies from continuing to drop other spiritual beings into the amnesia force screen area. Eventually, this will change. In addition, Earth inherently is a highly unstable planet. It is not suitable for settlement or permanent habitation for any sustainable civilization. This is part of the reason why it is being used as a prison planet. No one else would seriously consider living here for a variety of simple and compelling reasons. 1. The continental land masses of Earth are floating on the sea of molten lava beneath the surface, which causes the land masses to crack, crumble, and drift continually. 2. Because of the liquid nature of the core, the planet is largely volcanic and subject to earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. 3. The magnetic poles of the planet shift radically about once every 20,000 years. This causes a greater or lesser degree of devastation as a result of the tidal waves and climatic changes. 4. Earth is very distant from the center of the galaxy and from any other significant galactic civilization. This isolation makes it unsuitable for use except as a pit stop or jumping off point along the way between galaxies. The moon and the asteroids are far more suitable for this purpose because they do not have a significant gravity. 5. Earth is a heavy gravity planet with heavy metallic soil and a dense atmosphere. This makes it a treacherous for navigational purposes. That fact that I am in this room as a result of an in-flight accident, in spite of the technology of my craft and my extensive expertise as a pilot, are proof of these facts. 6. There are approximately 60 billion Earth-like Sun Type 12 Class 7 planets in the Milky Way galaxy alone, not to mention the vast expanses of the domain and the territories we will claim in the future. It is difficult to stretch our resources to do much more than a periodic reconnaissance of Earth, especially when there are no immediate advantages to invest in resources here. 7. On Earth, most beings are not aware that they are Isbis spiritual beings, or that there are spirits of any kind. Many other beings are aware of this, but nearly everyone has a very limited understanding of themselves as an Isbi, or spiritual being. One of the reasons for this is that Isbis and spiritual beings have been waging war against each other since the beginning of time. The purpose of these wars have always been to establish domination by one spiritual being Isbi or a group of Isbi spiritual beings over another. Since an Isbi spiritual being cannot be killed, quote unquote killed spiritually, the objective has been to capture and immobilize the spiritual being. This has been done in a nearly unlimited variety of ways. The most basic method to capture and immobilize a spiritual being or Isbi is through the use of various kinds of quote-unquote traps. Isbi spiritual beings' traps have been made and put in place by many invading societies, such as the one that was established by the Old Empire, beginning about 64 trillion years ago. Traps are often set up in the quote-unquote territory of the spiritual being Isbis being attacked. Usually a trap is set with the electronic wave of quote-unquote beauty to attract the interest and attention of Isbi spiritual beings. When the spiritual being Isbi moves towards the source of the aesthetic wave, such as the beautiful building or beautiful music, the trap is activated by the energy put out by the Isbi spiritual beings. One of the most common trap mechanisms uses the Isbi's own thought energy. Okay, let me repeat this again. One of the most common trap mechanisms uses the Isbi's own thought energy output when the Isbi spiritual being tries to attack or fight back against the trap. The trap is activated and energized by the Isbi spiritual being own thought energy. The harder the spiritual being Isbi fights against the trap, the more it pulls the IBS towards, or the Isbis toward it, and keeps them stuck in the trap. Throughout the entire history of this physical universe, vast areas of space have been taken over and colonized by ISB spiritual being societies who invade and take over new areas of space in this fashion. In the past, these invasions have always shared common elements. Number one, they overwhelmingly use force of arms, usually with nuclear or electronic weapons. Number two, mind control of the ISB spiritual being in the invaded area through the use of electroshock, drugs, hypnosis, erasure of memory, and the implantation of false memories or false information intended to subjugate and enslave the local spiritual population. Number three, take over natural resources by invading the ISB spiritual beings. Four, political and economic social slavery of the local population. These activities continue in present day, and this is interesting that they say this because many of the ruling class and the high society, royalty, noble bloods, or the blue bloods, they call them, they believe that they're gods. So this makes a lot of sense that this extraterrestrial supposedly, allegedly, was saying this in 1947. These activities continue in present time. All of the ISB spiritual beings on Earth have been members of one or more of these activities in the past, both as invader or as part of the population being invaded. There are no quote-unquote saints in the universe. Very few have avoided or been exempted from warfare between ISB's spiritual beings. ISB spiritual beings on Earth are still the victims of this activity at this very moment. The between lives amnesia administered to the ISB spiritual beings is one on the mechanisms of an elaborate system of the old empire spiritual being trap that prevents an ISB or spiritual being from escaping. This operation is managed by an illicit renegade secret police force of the quote-unquote old empire. They use false provocation operations to disguise their activities in order to prevent detection by their own government, the domain, and by the victims of their activities. There are mind-controlled methods developed by government psychiatrists. Earth is a ghetto planet. It is the result of an intergalactic holocaust. ISB spiritual beings have been sentenced to Earth either because, one, they are too viciously insane or perverse to function as part of any civilization, no matter how degraded or corrupt. Number two, they are a revolutionary threat to the social, economic, and political caste system that has been so carefully built and brutally enforced in the quote-unquote old empire. The biological bodies are specifically designed and designated as the lowest order of entity in the old empire caste system. When an ISB spiritual being is sent to Earth and then tricked or coerced into operating in the biological body, they are actually in a prison inside a prison. 3. In an effort to permanently and irreversibly rid the quote-unquote old empire of such untouchables, the eternal identity, memory, and abilities of every ISB spiritual being is forcefully erased. This quote-unquote final solution was conceived and carried out by the psychopathic criminals who are controlled by the old empire. The mass extermination of quote-unquote untouchables and prison camps created by the Nazi Germans or Germany during World War II were recently revealed. Likewise, the ISB spiritual beings of Earth are the victims of spiritual eradication and eternal slavery inside frail biological bodies inspired by the same kind of craven hatred in the old empire. The kind and creative inmates of Earth are continuously tortured by butchers, and lunatics who are controlled by the old empire prison operators. The so-called civilizations of Earth, from the age of useless pyramids to the age of nuclear holocaust, have been a colossal waste of natural resources and perverted use of intelligence, and an overt oppression of the spiritual essence of every single spiritual being on this planet. The domain sent ships to every corner of the universe in search of quote unquote hell. Their quest could end on Earth. What greater brutality can be inflicted on anyone than to erase the spiritual awareness, identity, ability, and memory that is the essence of oneself? The domain has as yet been unable to rescue the 3,000 ISB spiritual beings of the Expeditionary Force Battalion either. They are forced to inhabit biological bodies on Earth. We have been able to recognize and track most of them for the last 8,000 years. However, our attempts to communicate with them are usually futile, as they are unable to remember their true identity. The majority of the lost members of the domain force have followed the general progression of Western civilization from India into the Middle East, then to Chaldea and Babylon, and then into Egypt, through Achaia, Greece, Rome, into Europe, and to the Western Hemisphere, and then all around the world. The members of the Lost Battalion and many other ISB spiritual beings on Earth could be valuable citizens of the domain, not including those who are vicious criminals or perverts. Unfortunately, there has been no workable method conceived to emancipate the spiritual beings from Earth. Therefore, as a matter of common logic, as well as the official policy of the domain, it is safer and more sensible to avoid contact with the spiritual being population, or the ISBs of Earth, until such time as the proper resources can be allocated to locate and destroy the old empire force that has a screen and amnesia mechanisms or machinery, and develop a therapy to restore the memories of spiritual beings ISB. Chapter 9, a timeline of events. Personal footnotes. For this interview, I took written notes because Earl gave me a lot of dates and names that I couldn't possibly remember without writing them down. I didn't usually take notes, but during this lesson, I thought it was important to get the information exactly as she gave it to me. However, I discovered that my note-taking made it much more difficult for me to focus on receiving the communication from extraterrestrial Earl. I was sometimes so distracted by my own writing that I lost train of her thought, so I had to ask her to repeat herself several times. Earl continued to stay in communication with the communication officers on the asteroid belt space station, from which she received much of this information. Since Earl was an officer, a pilot, and engineer of the domain, and not a historian, she had to get the information records of reconnaissance missions conducted by other officers of the domain force. Official transcript, top secret. So the extraterrestrial continues to talk about the history. The actual history of Earth is very bizarre. It is so nonsensical that it is incredible to anyone on Earth who attempts to investigate it. The vital information missing from it, a huge conglomeration of non sequitur relics and mythology, has been arbitrarily introduced into it. The volatile nature of the Earth itself cyclically covers, drowns, mixes, shreds physical evidence. These factors, combined with amnesia and post-hypnotic suggestions, false facades, and covert manipulation make a reconstruction of the factual origins and history of the Earth civilizations virtually indecipherable. Any investigator, no matter how brilliant, is doomed to wallow in a quagmire of inconclusive assumptions, unworkable hypotheses, and perpetual mystery. Since the domain does not suffer these afflictions, having the advantage of memory, longevity, and exterior point of view, I will add some clarifications to your fragmentary knowledge of the history of Earth. These are some of the dates and events that are not mentioned in Earth history books. These dates are significant because they provide some information concerning the influences of the old empire and of the domain on Earth. I'm starting to think that the old empire is Atlantis. That's just my speculation right now. Okay, let me continue. Although I have attended several briefings by our mission control personnel on the general background of Earth within the past few hundred years, I will rely principally on the data gathered from records captured after our invasion of the old empire planetary headquarters. Since that time, the domain force has tracked the general progress of events on Earth. As I mentioned, in some cases, the domain has chosen to intervene in certain affairs on Earth in order to ensure the success of our long-term expansion plans. Although the domain has no interest in Earth per se, or in the population of the ISB spiritual beings on this planet, it does not serve our interests to ensure that the resources of Earth are not destroyed or spoiled. To that end, certain officers of the domain have been sent to Earth on reconnaissance missions from time to gather information. However, the following dates and events have been extrapolated from the accumulated information in the data files of the domain, at least those that are accessible to me through Space Station Communications Center. Around 208,000 BCE, the establishment of the old empire, whose headquarters were located near one of the quote-unquote tail stars in the Ursa Major Big Dipper constellation of this galaxy, the old empire invasion force conquered the area with nuclear weapons sometime earlier. Okay, so this is 208,000 years ago. After the radioactivity subsided and the cleanup and restoration were completed, it received the immigration of beings from another galaxy into this galaxy. Those beings set up a society that kept going until about 10,000 years ago, when it was superseded by the domain. Very recently, Earth's civilization has come to resemble aspects of that civilization, now that it has fallen out of its immediate control. In particular, the appearance and technology of transportation, such as planes, trains, ships, fire engines, automobiles, as well as what you consider the modern or futuristic architecture, which emulate the design of the buildings in the major cities of the old empire. Before 75,000 BC, the domain records contain very little information about the civilizations on the continental landmass of Atlanta, which is Atlantis, and Lemur, or is it Lemur or Lemuria, except to the note that they did coexist on Earth at more or less the same time. Apparently, both civilizations were founded by remnants of the electronic space opera cultures who fled from the native planetary systems to escape political or religious persecution. The domain knows that a long-standing edict of the old empire prohibits unauthorized colonization of planets. Therefore, it is possible that their destruction was caused by police or military forces who pursued the colonists as criminals and destroyed them. Although this seems a likely supposition, No conclusive evidence exists that explains the complete destruction and disappearance of the two entire electronic civilizations, Atlantis and Lemuria. Another possibility is that a massive submarine volcanic eruption in the region of Lake Toba in Sumatra and Mount Krakatoa in Java caused the destruction of Lemuria, which the extraterrestrial calls Lemur. The flood waters caused by the eruption overwhelmed all the land masses, including the highest mountains. Survivors of the destruction of the civilization, the Lemurians, are the earliest ancestors of the Chinese. Australia and the ocean areas to the north were the center of the Lemurian civilization and are the source of the Oriental races. Both civilizations possessed electronics, flight, and similar technologies of the space opera cultures. Apparently, the volcanic eruption expelled such a significant mass of molten rock that the resultant vacuum beneath the crust of the Earth caused great areas of land masses to sink below the oceans. The continental areas occupied by both civilizations were covered with volcanic matter and then submerged, leaving very little evidence that they ever existed, except for the legends of the global flood which prevail in every culture of the earth, and for the survivors who are the genus of the Oriental races and cultures. The kind of colossal volcanic explosion fills the stratosphere with toxic gases, which are carried around the whole planet. The usual refuse refuse of these volcanic eruptions can easily cause a rain that lasts for 40 days and 40 nights, quote unquote, due to the atmospheric pollution, as well as an extensive period during which radiation from the sun is deflected back into space and cause global cooling. Certainly, such an event would cause an ice age, extinctions of life forms, and many other relatively long term changes lasting for thousands of years. Due to the mar- due to the types of naturally occurring global cataclysm events, which are indigenous to Earth, is not a suitable planet for habitation by Isbis and spiritual beings. In addition, there have been occasional global cataclysms caused by the Isbis, spiritual beings, such as the one that destroyed the dinosaurs more than 70 million years ago. That destruction was caused by an intergalactic warfare, during which time Earth and many other neighboring moons and planets were bombarded by atomic weapons, atomic explosions that cause atmospheric fallout, much like that of volcanic eruptions. Most of the planets in this sector of the galaxy have been uninhabitable deserts since then. Earth is undesirable for many other reasons: heavy gravity, dense atmosphere, floods, earthquakes, volcanoes, polar shifts, continental drifts, meteor impacts, atmospheric and climatic changes, to name a few. What kind of lasting civilization could any sophisticated culture propose to develop in such an environment? In addition, Earth is a small planet of quote unquote rim star of a galaxy. This makes Earth very isolated geographically from the more concentrated planetary civilizations which exist towards the center of the galaxy. These obvious facts have made Earth suitable for use only as a zoological or botanical garden, or for its current use as a prison, but not much else. Before 30,000 BC, Earth started being used as a dumping ground and prison for Isbis, spiritual beings who are judged untouchable, meaning a criminal or nonconformist. Isbis and spiritual beings were captured, encapsulated in electronic traps, and transported to Earth from various parts of the old empire. Underground amnesia stations were set up on Mars and on Earth in the Rwenzori Mountains in Africa, and they were set up in the Pyrenees Mountains of Portugal and in steppes of Mongolia. These electronic monitoring points create a force screen designed to detect captured Isbi spiritual beings when the Isbi spiritual beings depart from their body at death. Oh my God. So now they're trying to say, like many people have been saying this over the years, that reincarnation is a trap. So this is what they're talking about. This is what the extraterrestrial is talking about now. The Isbis and spiritual beings depart the body at death. Isbis and spiritual beings are brainwashed using extreme electronic force in order to maintain Earth's population in state of perpetual amnesia. Further population controls are installed through the use of long-range electronic thought control mechanisms. These stations are still in operation and they are extremely difficult to attack or destroy, even for the domain, which will not maintain a significant military force in this area until a later date. The pyramid civilizations were intentionally created as part of the Isbi spiritual prison system on Earth. The pyramid is alleged to be the symbol of wisdom, quote unquote. However, the quote unquote wisdom is of the old empire on planet Earth and is intended to operate as part of the elaborate amnesia trap consisting of mass meaning and mystery. These are opposite to the qualities of the immortal spiritual being, which have no mass or meaning. An Isbi spiritual being is solely because it thinks that it is. Mass represents the physical universe, including objects such as stars, planets, gases, liquids, energy particles, and teacups. The pyramids were very, very solid objects, as were all the structures created by the old empire. Heavy, massive, dense, solid objects create the illusion of eternity. Dead bodies wrapped in linen, soaked in resin, placed inside engraved golden coffins, and entombed with earthly possessions amid cryptic symbols create an illusion of eternal life. However, dense, heavy physical universe symbols are those exact opposite of an Isbi spiritual being. An Isbi spiritual being has no mass or time. Objects do not endure forever. An Isbi is forever. An Isbi spiritual beings on earth, is forever. Meaning, so now they're giving it meaning. False meanings prevent knowledge of the truth. The pyramid cultures of the earth are fabricated illusions. They are nothing more than false civilizations, contrived by the quote unquote old empire mystery cult that is called the Brothers of the Serpent. False meanings are invented to create the illusion of a false society to further reinforce the amnesia mechanism among the intimates in the earth prison or inmates in the earth prison system. Mystery is built of the lies and the half-truths. Lies cause persistence because they alter facts which are comprised of exact dates, places, and events. When truth is known, a lie no longer persists. If the exact truth is revealed, it is no longer a mystery. All of the pyramid civilizations of Earth were carefully contrived of layer upon layer of lies. skillfully combined with a few truths. The priest cult, or the priesthood cult of the old empire, combined sophisticated mathematics and space opera technology with theatrical metaphors and symbolism. All of these are complete fabrications of the truth, baited with the allure of aesthetics and mystery. The intricate rituals, astronomical alignments, secret rites, massive monuments, marvelous architecture, artistically rendered hieroglyphs, and man animal gods were designed to create unsolvable mysteries for the Isby spiritual prison population of the earth. The mystery diverts attention away from the truth. That is, Isby's spiritual beings have been captured, given amnesia, and imprisoned on the planet far, far away from their home. The truth is that every single Isby on Earth, spiritual being, came to Earth from some other planetary system. Not one person on Earth is a native inhabitant. Human beings did not evolve on Earth. In the past, the Egyptian society was run by the prison administrators or priesthood, who in turn manipulated a pharaoh, controlled the treasury, and kept the inmate population enslaved, physically and spiritually. In modern times, the priesthood have changed, but the function is the same. However, now the priesthood or the priest are in themselves prisoners too. Mystery reinforces the walls of the prison. The old empire feared that the spiritual beings, Isbys, on earth might regain their memory. Therefore, one of the primary functions of the old empire priesthood is to prevent earth spiritual beings, Isbys, uh, from remembering who they really are and how they came to earth, where they came from. The old empire operators of the prison planet and the superior or their superiors do not want spiritual beings or Isbys to remember who murdered them, who captured them, who stole all of their possessions and sent them to the earth and gave them amnesia, condemned them to eternal imprisonment. Imagine what might happen if all the inmates in a prison suddenly remembered that they have the right to be free. What if they suddenly realized that they have been falsely imprisoned and rise up as one against the guards? They are afraid to reveal anything that looks like the civilization of the inmates' home planets. A body, a piece of clothing, a symbol, a spaceship, an advanced electronic device, or any other remnant of civilizations from a home planet could remind a being and rekindle his memory. Sophisticated technologies of entrapment and enslavement, which were developed over millions of years in the old empire, have been applied to the Isbys or spiritual beings on earth with the intention to create a false facade for the prison. These facades were installed on earth in totality all at once. Every piece is a fully integrated part of the prison planet and the prison system. This includes a religion of doublespeak. Every pyramid civilization uses this as a part of the controlled mechanism to keep the population enslaved by force, by fear, by ignorance. The indecipherable muddle of irrelevant information, geometric designs, mathematical calculations, astronomical alignments are part of a false spirituality based on solid objects rather than immortal spirits in order to confuse and disorient the spiritual beings, Isbys of earth. When the body of a person dies or died, they are buried or were buried with their earthly possessions, including their former body wrapped in linen, to sustain their soul or their Ka, after death. An Isby spiritual being does not have a quote unquote soul. An Isby is, you are a spiritual being. You are an Isby you are the soul. On the home planet of the spiritual Isby, their material possessions were not lost, stolen, or forgotten when the being died or left the body. An Isby spiritual being could return and claim the possessions. However, if the Isby has amnesia, they will not remember that they had any possession. So governments, insurance companies, bankers, family members, other vultures can pick their possessions clean without fear of retribution from the deceased. The only reason for these false meanings is to instill the idea that an Isby spiritual being is not a spirit, but a physical object. This is a lie. It is a trap for a spiritual being. Countless people have spent endless hours attempting to solve the jigsaw puzzle of Egypt or other old empire civilizations. They are puzzles made of pieces that do not fit. A question states its own answer. What is the mystery of Egypt and other pyramid cultures? The mystery is mystery. Circa 15,000 BC, the old empire forces supervised the construction of the hydraulic mining operation of the Andes Mountains in present-day Bolivia, near the Lake Titicaca, or the Lake of Tin Stones, and Tiwanaku, including construction of the massive stone complex of carved stones buildings known as the Kalasaya and its Gates of the Sun at an elevation of nearly 14,000 feet, 11,600 BC. The polar axis of the Earth shifted to a sea area. The last ice age came to an end abruptly as the polar ice caps melted and the level of the ocean rose to submerge large sections of the land masses of the Earth. The last remaining vestiges of Atlantis and Lemuria were covered by water. Massive extinctions of animals occurred in the Americas, Australia, the Arctic regions due to the shift of the poles. 10,400 BCE, plans were made by the old empire that Isby's spiritual beings called Thoth for construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza. The 4 air shafts of the pyramid point precisely to the key stars in the old empire, as seen from Giza in this year. The alignment of the pyramids of Giza on the ground matches perfectly to the alignment of the constellation of Orion, as seen in the sky from Giza, relative to the Nile as the earthly representation of the Milky Way in the sky. 10,400 BC. According to the earth historian Herodotus, records from the ruined civilization of Atlantis containing electronic technology and other technology of that society were buried in a vault beneath the paws of the Sphinx. The Greek historian wrote that he was told this by some of his friends who were priests of Anu, the Sumerian god, at the Egyptian city of Heliopolis. However, it is highly unlikely that any traces of an electronic civilization would be allowed to be left intact on Earth by the old empire prison system. 8,212 BC. The Veda or the Vedic hymns are a set of religious hymns that were introduced into the societies of Earth. They came forward in spoken tradition, memorized from generation to generation. The hymn to the dawn child includes an idea called, quote unquote, the cycle of the physical universe. The creation, the growth, the conservation, the decay, and the death or destruction of the energy and matter in space. These cycles produce time. The same set of hymns describes the theory of evolution. Here is a great, tremendous body of knowledge which contains a great deal of spiritual truths. Unfortunately, it has been incorrectly evaluated by humans and altered with lies and reversals of fact by the priestess or the priesthood, which are a booby trap to prevent anyone from using the wisdom to discover a way to escape from the prison. 8050 BC. Destruction of the old empire home planet government in this galaxy. This was the end of the old empire as a political entity in the galaxy. However, the vast size of the old empire will take many thousands of years for the domain to conquer completely. The inertia of the political and economic cultural systems of the old empire will remain in place for some time to come. However, remnants of the old empire space fleet in the solar system of Earth were finally destroyed in 1230 AD. In addition to the operatives of the old empire who run the Earth's prison operation, there were other beings from old empire who came to Earth. Since Earth was no longer under the control of the empire after their defeat by the domain forces, there was no police force to control military renegades, space pirates, miners, merchants, entrepreneurs who came to Earth to exploit the resources of the planet for personal gain, and many other nefarious reasons. For example, the history of Earth according to the Jewish people described the Nephilim. Chapter 6 of the book of Genesis describes the origin of the Nephilim. And this is what it states. Now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves whoever they chose. The Nephilim were on earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. The ancient Jewish people who wrote the history book called the Old Testament were slaves. They were herders and gatherers. Any modern technology, even a simple flashlight, would seem outstanding and miraculous to them. They attributed it to any unexplainable phenomenon or technology to the workings of a god. Unfortunately, this behavior is universal among all spiritual isbis or spiritual beings who have been given amnesia and cannot remember their own experiences, their own training, their own technology, personality, or identity. Obviously, if these were men and they mated with earth women, they were not sons of God. They were Isbi spiritual beings who inhabited biological bodies in order to take advantage of the political situation in the old empire or simply to indulge in physical sensation. They set up small colonies of their own on Earth beyond the reach of the police and tax authorities. Coincidentally, one of the most serious crimes an Isbi spiritual being could commit in the old empire was to violate income tax regulations. Income taxes were used as a slavery mechanism and as a punishment in the old empire. The slightest error in a tax report made an Isbi spiritual being untouchable, followed by imprisonment on earth. 6750 BC, other pyramid civilizations were set up. They were established in Babylon, in Egypt, in China, and Mesoamerica. The Mesopotamian area provided service facilities, communication stations, space ports, stone quarry operations for these false civilizations. Ptah was the name given to the first in a succession of administrators. And Ptah is part of the, I don't know if it's the Egyptian god, considered the Egyptian gods. So Ptah was a name given to the first in a succession of administrators from the old empire who represented themselves to the Earth population as quote unquote divine rulers. Ptah's importance may be understood when one learns that the word Egypt is a Greek corruption of the phrase Het Ka Ptah, or the house of the spirit of Ptah. Ptah was nicknamed the developer. He was a construction engineer. His high priesthood was given the title Great Leader of the Craftsmen. Ptah was also the god of reincarnation in Egypt. He originated the quote unquote opening of the mouth ceremony, which was performed by the priesthoods or the priest at funerals to release the souls from their corpses. Of course, when the souls were released, they were captured and given amnesia and returned to the earth again. The so called divine rulers who followed Ptah on earth were called the Nitar, meaning the guardians or the watchers, by the Egyptians. Their symbol was the serpent or the dragon, which represented a secret priesthood of the old empire that was called the Brothers of the Serpent. The old empire engineers used cutting tools of highly concentrated light waves to quickly carve and excavate stone blocks. They also used force fields and spacecraft to lift and transport blocks of stone weighing hundreds of thousands of tons each. The placement on the ground of some of these structures will be found to have geodetic or astronomical significance relative to various stars in this galaxy or galactic region. The buildings are crude and impractical compared to building standards on most planets. As an engineer of the domain, I can attest that makeshift structures like these would never pass inspection on another planet in the domain. Stone blocks such as those used in the pyramid civilizations can still be seen partially excavated in the stone quarries of the Middle East and elsewhere. Most of the structures were hastily built like props, much like the false facades of the Western town on the set of a motion picture. They appear to be real and to have some use or value. However, they have no value. They have no useful purpose. The pyramids and all of the stone monuments erected by the old empire could be called mystery monuments. For that reason, would anyone waste so many resources to construct so many useless buildings to create a mysterious illusion? The fact of the matter is that each of the divine rulers, quote unquote, were Isbi's spiritual beings who served as operatives of the old empire. They were certainly not divine, although they were Isbi's spiritual beings. 6248 BC, the beginning of active warfare between the Domain Space Command and the surviving remnants of the Empire Space Fleet. The space fleet in the solar system that lasted nearly 7,500 years. It began when an installation was established in the Himalaya Mountains by a battalion of 3,000 officers. The crew members of the domain force. The installation was not fortified, as the domain was not aware that the old empire maintained Earth as a prison planet. The domain installation was attacked and destroyed by space forces of the old empire, who continued to operate in the solar system of Earth. Isbi's spiritual beings of the domain battalion were captured. They were taken to Mars, given amnesia, and sent back to Earth to inhabit human biological bodies. They are still on Earth. 5965 BC, the investigations into the disappearance of the domain forces in the solar system led to the discovery of the old empire bases on Mars and elsewhere. The domain took over a planet, Venus, as a defensive position against the space force of the old empire. The domain force also monitors life forms on Venus, which has a very dense, hot, heavy atmosphere of sulfuric acid clouds. There are a few life forms on Earth that can endure an atmospheric environment like Venus. The domain also established secret installations or space stations in the Earth's solar system. This solar system has a planet that is broken up, the asteroid belt. It provides a very useful low gravity platform for takeoff and landing of spacecraft. It is used as a galactic jump between the Milky Way and adjoining galaxies. There aren't any planets at this end of the galaxy that can serve as a good galactic entering spot for incoming transport or other ships. But this broken up planet makes a very ideal space station. As a result of our war against the old empire, this area of the solar system is now valuable possession of the domain. 3450 BC, 3100 BC. The intervention into the affairs of Earth by the old empire operatives, or so called divine gods, were distributed or disrupted at this time by the domain forces. They were forced to replace themselves with human rulers. The first dynasty of human pharaohs who united Upper and Lower Egypt began with the rule of the pharaoh who coincidentally was named Men. He established a capital city called Men-Nefer, the beauty of Men in Egypt. This started the first succession of 10 human pharaohs in a period of 350 years of chaos that followed in the administrative ranks of the old empire. 3200 BC. As I mentioned earlier, Earth was under attack between the domain and the old empire forces during this period. Of course, this does not make any sense to archaeologists or historians, because the Egyptian period is a space opera era period. Since Earth historians have amnesia, they assume that this was only a religious period. Further, because the technology and civilizations installed on Earth during this period were pre-packaged, they did not evolve on Earth. Of course, there is no evidence anywhere on Earth of an evolutionary transition which resulted in the sophisticated mathematics, language, writing, religion, architecture, cultural traditions in Egypt, or any other pyramid civilizations. These cultures, complete with all of their details of racial body types, hairstyles, facial makeup, rituals, moral codes, and so forth, just appeared as complete integrated packages. The physical evidence suggests that all evidence of the intervention of the domain and old empire forces or any other extraterrestrial activity has been carefully, quote unquote, cleaned up so as not to create suspicion. The old empire force does not want the spiritual beings of Earth to suspect that they have been captured, transplanted to Earth, and brainwashed. So, Earth historians continue to assume that the Egyptian priesthood were not supposed to have ray guns or other technology of the old. And they suppose that there was nothing going on Earth except some priest walking around saying Amen, which the Christians still say today. 3172 BC. Layout of the astronomical grid that joins the key mining sites and astronomical buildings of the gods. This is in the Andes Mountains, such as Tiwanaku, Cusco, and the cities of Ollantaytambo in Machu Picchu, and the Pachacama for the mining of rare metals, including tin for use in making bronze, and metals were the property of the gods. A great variety of entrepreneurial mining was done on Earth at that time. due to the war between the old empire force and the domain. These miners did carve a few sculptures of themselves. They are seen wearing mining helmets. The Ponce Stella sculpture in the sunken courtyard of the Kalasaya temple is a crude rendering of the stoneworker using an electronic light wave emitting stone cutter and carving tools that is held in a holster. The old empire has also maintained mining operations on the planets throughout the galaxy for a very long time. The mineral resources of Earth are now property of the domain. 2450 BC, the Great Pyramid and complex of pyramids near Cairo were completed. An inscription created by the old empire administrators can be seen in the so-called pyramid texts. The texts say that the pyramid was built under the direction of Thoth, son of Ptah. Of course, there was never a king buried in the chamber, since the pyramids were never intended to be used as burial chambers. The Great Pyramid was located precisely at the exact center of all of the land masses of the Earth, as viewed from space. Obviously, such precise measurements require aerial perspective and a view of the land masses of Earth from space. Purely mathematical calculations of the geodetic center of the continents of the Earth could not be made otherwise. The shafts were constructed inside the pyramid to align with the configuration of the stars and the constellations of Orion. They were aligned with Orion, Canis Majora, and specifically Sirius. The shafts are also aligned to the Big Dipper, where the home planet of the old empire existed. Also the Anitak Alpha Draconis and Beta Ursa Minor. These stars are each one of the key systems in the old empire from which Isbi spiritual beings were brought to Earth and dumped as unwanted merchandise. The configuration of all the pyramids of Giza Plateau was intended to create a mirror image on Earth of the solar system and certain constellations within the old empire. Min became the god of fertility of Egypt. The Isbi, also known as Pan, was also a Greek god. Min or Pan was an Isbi spiritual being who somehow managed to escape from the old empire amnesia system. The 2160 and 2040 BC, one of the results of the intensifying battle between the domain forces and the empire forces was that the control of the divine rulers was broken at this time. They finally left Egypt and returned to the heavens to speak and defeat. Human beings took over the ruling role as pharaohs. The first human pharaoh moved to the capital city of Egypt from Memphis to Heracleopolis. All right, guys, that's enough for tonight, Saturday. I'll come back tomorrow with the remainder. Tomorrow will be 1500 BC. They talk about Atlantis and the Egyptian priesthoods and the priest of Anu. And then they get into how long Atlantis, the continent existed, and what happened to the Atlantean people. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, hit all notification for future live streams and videos. If you want to support monetarily, you can support me in the links in the description. I'll be back tomorrow with the next chapter. Stay safe, and I'll talk to you soon.